black girl asked, "Can I eat with you?" The billionaire's heart broke hearing her painful words. It was just after noon at Jackson Heights Elementary, and the lunchroom buzzed like a beehive. Trays clattered, sneakers squeaked across the tile floor, and the sharp scent of pizza and fruit cups hung in the air. Kids clustered around tables, laughing loud, trading snacks, jostling for space. But at table 4, just under the flickering fluorescent light, sat one man in a tailored gray suit, surrounded by silence. David Langston, billionaire tech mogul, guest speaker for the school's career week. He wasn't supposed to stay for lunch, but some ache he couldn't name had made him linger. Maybe it was the way the cafeteria felt too big for such small hearts. Maybe it was how out of place he felt in his polished shoes and perfect watch. And then, she asked, a little black girl no older than 8. Tight braids, a pink jacket 2 sizes too small. She stood at the edge of his table, tray trembling in her hands. "Can I eat with you?" Her voice was soft, almost practiced, like she'd heard no before, too many times. He looked at her, looked around. All the other tables were full, but she'd been sitting alone. He nodded slowly. "Yeah, of course you can." She sat across from him, no smile, just relief, and opened her milk carton like it was a ritual. And David Langston, who'd closed billion-dollar deals, spoken to presidents, and watched rockets launch, felt something crack wide open in his chest. Stay with this story. What happened next will change the way you see kindness forever. If you want to hear more stories like this, please like the video and hit that subscribe button. And feel free to leave a comment. We'd love to hear your thoughts. David Langston watched the girl peel back the foil on her fruit cup with careful fingers, like it might break or be taken away. Her eyes stayed down, her shoulders hunched slightly, as if she was trying to disappear, even while sitting across from someone the entire school had buzzed about all morning. The billionaire. The man with the black SUV and the tailored suit and the deep voice that filled the auditorium like a movie trailer. He cleared his throat gently. "What's your name?" "Keisha," she said, barely above a whisper. "I'm in 3rd grade. "That's a good grade," he replied, trying to meet her energy, low, cautious, real. "You like it?" She shrugged. "It's okay." Across the cafeteria, a sharp laugh cut through the quiet. A cluster of teachers stood near the wall, arms folded, one of them watching the table with poorly disguised disdain. Ms. Trammell, vice principal. Straight-laced, always composed. Her eyes narrowed on Keisha like she didn't belong there. David noticed, and he didn't like it. Ms. Trammell began walking toward them, heels ticking across the floor like a metronome. "Mr. Langston," she said with a tight smile, "we're so grateful you could stay for lunch. We were just about to escort you to the staff lounge for a quieter space." David looked up. "I'm good here, thanks." She hesitated. Her eyes flicked to Keisha, then back. "Of course. It's just that, well, we want you to be comfortable." "I am," he said, his voice calm but edged. "She asked to eat with me. That okay?" There was a beat of silence. Miss Trammell smiled again, tight, practiced, and turned back to her post. But the look she gave Keisha on the way out said more than words ever could. Keisha kept her head down, scooping up a slice of canned peach. "She doesn't like me," she said. David didn't answer right away. He just watched the girl eat, slow and quiet. She reminded him of someone. Himself. Back when he was just Dave Langston. Southside Chicago. Free lunch kid. Raised by a grandmother who worked double shifts and still made time to quiz him on spelling words. Back when sitting alone was normal, and having clean shoes was a luxury. He hadn't worn a suit until he got to college. Hadn't been invited to anyone's house until senior year. And back then, no one ever asked to eat with him either. The memory lodged deep in his throat. Keisha glanced up. "You rich?" David chuckled. "Yeah, I guess I am. You don't look like you're from around here." He smiled. "I'm not." Keisha nodded slowly, then returned to her lunch like she'd confirmed a theory she'd been building in her head for months. "People don't sit with me much." "Why not?" Another shrug. "I dunno. I guess I'm just me." David watched her for a moment, then looked around. Kids ran past them, tossed trash at each other, poked fun, shouted. But none of them glanced twice at their table. In a room full of noise, they were invisible. And that's when the laughter started. From a nearby table, a boy pointed and laughed. "Look, Keisha's got a boyfriend." More laughter followed, mean, sharp, immature. Keisha froze. Her hand trembled as she tried to fold the edge of her sandwich wrapper. David's eyes narrowed. He leaned slightly forward. "Hey," he said, voice low but firm. "Is that funny to you?" The boy blinked. "No, sir." Didn't sound like a joke. The cafeteria hushed. A few teachers turned their heads. David didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He just looked at the boy, held his stare. Then he turned back to Keisha. "You know what I used to do when people laughed at me?" he asked. She looked up, eyes wide. "What?" "I kept going. I worked harder. I didn't quit." Keisha nodded slowly, absorbing it like it was gold. David reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a pen, sleek, silver, engraved. "This pen," he said, setting it gently on the table, "signed my first company papers. I kept it to remind me where I started. Want to hold it?" She picked it up like it was magic. "It's heavy." He smiled. "So's the work. But it's worth it." Across the cafeteria, Ms. Trammell looked displeased. A few teachers whispered. But David didn't care. Let them talk. Let them clutch their policies and polish smiles. He'd spoken at Ivy League schools, stood beside senators, closed tech deals on 3 continents. But nothing in those boardrooms had ever felt as urgent, as real, as this moment. Keisha set the pen down gently. "Can I be like you someday?" David met her eyes. "No, you can be better." For the first time, she smiled. And David Langston, the billionaire who once had nothing but a cracked notebook and a dream, realized why he'd stayed. This wasn't about a speech, or a school, or optics. This was about legacy. One tray, one seat, one girl who needed to be seen. The cafeteria quieted the way a room does when something real starts happening, when the air gets thick and the usual rules stop working. David Langston stood up, slow, measured. He wasn't angry. He wasn't loud. But the way he rose, like someone who'd spent years walking into rooms that weren't built for him, made everyone sit up just a little straighter. Even the teachers. Even Ms. Trammell. He cleared his throat and glanced down at Keisha. "You mind if I say something?" She looked up, eyes wide. "Okay." He turned toward the lunchroom. Not yelling. Not raising his hands. Just speaking in the same calm, steady voice that had once pitched a $10 billion idea on a napkin at midnight. "I want to tell y'all something," he said, his voice cutting clean through the cafeteria noise. "I met a girl today, her name is Keisha. She asked if she could eat lunch with me, and I said yes." A few students laughed awkwardly, but no one interrupted. She didn't ask for money. She didn't ask what I owned. She didn't ask for anything except a seat. And it broke my heart that she had to ask. He looked around slowly, pausing. "Let me tell you why." Silence. "When I was her age, I was just like her. Quiet. Wore hand-me-downs. Got picked on. Sat by myself. Teachers looked past me. Kids called me names. And no one asked to sit with me either. Not once." A few teachers shifted. Some students stared. "I worked my way through it. Built something out of nothing. Now, I own one of the biggest tech companies in the country. I've hired thousands of people, engineers, designers, developers. You know the kind of person I look for? Someone like Keisha. Someone who doesn't give up, even when nobody's clapping for them." He turned and smiled down at her. She looked stunned, like no one had ever said her name with that much care. "I don't know what y'all see when you look at her," he continued, scanning the room again. "But I see greatness. I see potential." Then he turned toward Miss Trammell, whose arms were still folded, just tighter now. "With all due respect," he said, polite but pointed. "You invited me here to inspire kids. I am. But maybe the ones who need it most aren't the straight-A students sitting in the front row. Maybe it's the ones in the back. The ones eating alone." The room was still. Even the lunch lady had stopped pouring juice. David stepped back to the table, sat down again beside Keisha. "You asked if you could eat with me," he said quietly, just for her. "But I needed this more than you know." She smiled, barely able to hold back the tears. She didn't say anything, but her hand rested gently near his, and that was enough. Across the room, one of the boys who'd laughed earlier stood up awkwardly, carrying his tray. He walked over. Can I sit here too?" Keisha looked at David. He nodded. "Your call." She smiled shyly and motioned to the seat beside her. "Okay." And just like that, the table grew by one. Then another girl came over. Then two more kids from the far end of the cafeteria. The table, once a quiet island, became something else. A gathering. A ripple. A new pattern in a place that rarely changed. Even the principal, who had been watching from the door, stepped in and walked quietly toward Miss Trammell. No words were exchanged, but something passed between them. Something quiet. Something overdue. David didn't try to command the room anymore. He let it unfold. This wasn't a press release. This wasn't a social media moment. This was human. He just sat beside Keisha and laughed as the kids started talking about their favorite chips and video games and which teachers gave the most homework. No big speeches now. Just presence. Just kindness. Just the kind of moment you hope sticks. And for Keisha, this would stick. Forever. That was the moment she stopped being invisible. That was the day the world turned toward her, instead of away. And that was the day David Langston remembered what real success looks like. Not the headlines, not the money, but the quiet power of showing up, for someone who thought no one ever would. The cafeteria had never been so quiet. Not silent exactly, the clatter of trays still echoed, kids still whispered, but the tone had shifted. The kind of hush that happens after a storm, when everything feels a little more awake. David Langston sat back in his seat, surrounded now by 7 kids, all chatting, all leaning in. Keisha was in the center, still clutching the silver pen like it was treasure. Her smile hadn't faded. She wasn't trying to be small anymore. She was just being a kid who belonged. Across the room, Miss Trammell stood frozen near the wall, arms still folded, but the stiffness in her posture had softened. Her eyes tracked Keisha with something new, not suspicion this time, but recognition. She stepped forward. "Mr. Langston," she said carefully, "may I speak with you for a moment?" David looked up, calm, neutral. "Of course." He stood, excused himself from the table with a gentle touch to Keisha's shoulder, then followed Miss Trammell a few steps away toward the empty side of the room. She cleared her throat. "I'd like to apologize." David raised an eyebrow but said nothing. "I misread the moment," she admitted. "And I've misread that student, Keisha, more than once." He didn't gloat, didn't smirk, just nodded slightly, letting the silence stretch long enough to feel like truth. "I appreciate you saying that," he said quietly. Miss Trammell looked over her shoulder, watching the lunch table. She's always been quiet, kept to herself. Sometimes we assume that means she's fine. But today, her voice caught just slightly. "Today I realized how invisible she must feel." David's gaze softened. "Most people who make it out come from rooms where no one saw them." She nodded, eyes glistening. "We'll do better. I'll do better." He nodded once more, then turned to walk back. But she stopped him with one last question, hesitant, genuine. "What would you do differently if you were me?" He paused, then looked her in the eye. "I'd start asking the quiet kids more questions." She didn't argue. Back at the table, something beautiful had happened. The kids weren't just talking, they were listening to each other. A girl in braids leaned across to ask Keisha what kind of music she liked. A boy offered to trade her his Oreos. Another just sat beside her, no questions asked. David sat back down. Keisha looked up, curious. "What did she want?" "She said sorry," David said with a small smile. Her eyes widened. "She never says sorry." David leaned in. "You changed that." Keisha sat a little taller. Then, from the edge of the cafeteria, a teacher approached, Mr. Daniels, the PE coach. Tall, gruff, known for blowing his whistle too hard during dodgeball. He rubbed the back of his neck. Awkward. Mr. Langston, he said. I just wanted to say thank you. That was something special, what you said. David nodded. Appreciate that. Mr. Daniels hesitated. Can I ask you something? Sure. When you were her age, what kept you going? I mean, really? David didn't answer right away. His eyes drifted to Keisha again, then to the other kids at the table. His voice was soft when he finally spoke. Hope, he said, and one person who believed in me. Coach Daniels nodded slowly. Guess I need to be that person a little more often. Another teacher joined. Then another. Not to perform. Not to grandstand. Just to ask. To listen. The billionaire didn't give advice like a guru. He didn't hand out money or give anyone a book deal. He just sat there, solid and open, letting people see that success doesn't always look like a private jet. Sometimes it looks like a quiet lunch table. Sometimes it sounds like a girl asking, "Can I eat with you?" And sometimes it feels like a room learning how to love better, all at once. Keisha leaned close again. Can I keep the pen? David smiled. It's yours now. She held it like it was a sword, not to fight with, but to sign her future. And David Langston, who'd once thought his legacy would be code and capital, realized that this quiet shift in one small school cafeteria might be the most valuable thing he'd ever built. Because real power isn't loud. It doesn't walk in swinging. It listens. It sees. And it makes room. The next Monday, everything felt different at Jackson Heights Elementary. Not louder. Not shinier. Just warmer. The lunchroom looked the same on the surface. Long tables, sticky trays, milk cartons lined in rows. But something had shifted beneath it all. There was a new energy, like the walls had taken a deep breath and let something go. Keisha didn't sit alone anymore. In fact, no one did. There was a new chart on the cafeteria wall, handwritten in bold marker. Open table pledge, no one eats alone. Kids had signed their names beneath it in crooked print, some with hearts, others with tiny drawings. One name sat right at the top, in careful looped letters. Keisha R. It was her idea. Miss Trammell had asked her that Friday, pulled her aside with a soft smile and a notepad. What do you think would help? Keisha had blinked, confused at first. No one had asked her before. But when she spoke, her voice was clear. And people listened. Now, teachers rotated through the cafeteria each day not to monitor, but to sit with students. Coach Daniels had started a talk and walk club after lunch. And on Thursdays, the school library stayed open during recess for a new program called Quiet Voices, where kids who didn't like loud crowds could write stories, share poems, or just be heard. Keisha went every week. And David Langston? He came back, not just for another lunch, but for good. The district superintendent had called him the following Monday with an invitation. You changed something in 1 hour we've struggled with for 10 years, she said. Would you consider helping us? Build something permanent? He said yes. 2 weeks later, David stood in front of the school board in a clean, gray sweater and jeans, not a suit. He didn't need polish anymore. His voice was enough. I'm not here to donate computers, he said. I'm here to create a system where no child has to wonder if they matter. They listened. He called it the Table Project, a district-wide initiative focused on belonging, mentorship, and equity. Not just performance metrics, not test scores. Belonging. Every school got a community table. Every staff member received training on quiet bias and unseen loneliness. And every student, especially the ones who went unnoticed, got at least one adult in the building assigned to check in with them by name every week. By spring, over a dozen schools had joined. Keisha stood beside David at the launch event, wearing a new pink jacket, one that actually fit. She spoke at the microphone, only 3 sentences, but every word landed. I thought no one saw me, she said. But now I see myself. And I think that's enough to start with. The room rose to its feet. That night, David sat in his car for a long time before driving off. The parking lot was quiet. The stars stretched high above the school roof like they were watching too. He looked down at his phone. An email from a board member offering him a formal seat as an advisor to the district. It wasn't a title he'd ever imagined wanting. But it felt right. Not because he needed more power. Because he finally knew what to do with it. Inside the school, the janitor turned off the cafeteria lights one by one. The room dimmed gently, shadows dancing across the empty tables. One table stayed lit a little longer, the one where it all began. The one where a girl once asked, "Can I eat with you?" And a man said yes. Not because he felt sorry, but because he recognized her. Because somewhere deep inside he still was her. That's how change begins. Not in policy, not in headlines, but in small, brave questions. In quiet yes. And tables that grow. David Langston didn't save the world. He just made it safer for one child to speak. And that was enough to start a new one. If the story moved you, share it. Because sometimes the right seat at the right table can rewrite a life. Thanks for watching.